We are going to go ahead and get started. So everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today at our ETHOS UP FAQ webinar. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Eric Farrell. I am the product specialist here at Milestone for microwave digestion in clean chemistry. So today what we'll be doing is we will be going over some of the frequently asked questions that we have received from users such as yourselves over the years. Also, we have some advice we like to put in here to help make sure you're getting the full best use out of your system. I did receive, for those of you who did submit questions, thank you, I do have them. However, if you do have any questions during the webinar, you can feel free to submit them via the Q&A, the Q&A box, and then I'll get to those at the end of the webinar. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you look at the top bar of your computer screen, you're going to see a black bar here. And then what I'd like you to look at is this white box with the smaller white box inside, where I have the red arrow. That will allow you to switch between the content, which is my PowerPoint presentation, as well as the video where you will see me. I'll be showing you some of the accessories for the rotors, etc. So you can click this window to switch your focus between the content and the video. You can also double click on the window you would like, for example, the Milestone Inc. or the Milestone Lab, to bring that into focus. So first, for today we're going to be talking about both operation of your system as well as maintenance to keep you in top working condition. So we'll go a little bit over the capabilities of the rotors, as well as how does the temperature control work. We have a little bit of applications as far as how is your digestion successful or not, how do you know it worked, and some info on cleaning vessels. Then we go to care and maintenance of your different consumables. And I'm going to speak about a lot of different information here. And a lot of this, what I'm going to be speaking about, is available on Milestone Connect. So for those of you who may not be familiar with it, I'll show that to you so you can see what that is. Okay, so first let's get into operation. So what are the capabilities of the different rotors? So the rotors that you have are either going to be the Maxi 44, our high throughput medium pressure rotor shown here, or our SK15, which is our high pressure medium throughput rotor. So for those of you who have the Maxi 44, that's going to be more of your rotor for routine type samples that are really not too difficult to digest. As far as applications, it'll work anything that's in the environmental. For example, the EPA 3015, 3051, 3052. Also for food and agriculture samples as well, you can use it. And for cannabis, if you're working at some lower masses, say around 1/4 gram to 1/2 gram maximum, but typically like to keep that on the lower side. The SK15 is really going to be your go-to rotor to digest pretty much anything that you put in it. So, for example, whatever you can do on the Maxi, you can do on the SK. So the SK maximum sample mass is going to depend. It's going to be for reactive organics, maybe around 0.4, 0.5 grams. If you get up to 1 gram, those are going to be samples that are easier to digest. So just make sure that whenever you're selecting your proper method, you're using the appropriate mass. And if you ever have a question at all, please reach into us. We can give you some guidance on the appropriate acid chemistry or sample masses if you have, say, a new application that you've never worked with before on your current rotor. So we can help you adapt the method to help you analyze that on your instrument as best as can. So we also have a nice resource called the ETHOS Rotor Guide. You may or may not have seen this before. The Rotor Guide gives very good guidance and a description on the different applications you can use for each rotor, as you see right over here. Also, we have suggested sample masses, maximum masses. So this is a very good resource if you want to have an idea of what you can do in your rotor. And again, any questions, feel free to reach into us at the milesCARE team here. We're happy to help you. So the next topic I want to talk about is temperature control. So how does the temperature control work within your ETHOS? So this is going to vary depending on if you have the SK15 or the Maxi 44. However, I'll speak to both of those individually. Before we really get into that, I want everybody to understand, and you should understand, that it is temperature that is one of the most important parameters in any digestion process. And temperature directly affects the digestion quality. Typically, the hotter you go, the better digestion you'll get, up until a certain point, of course, until you've reached the temperature required to break down your sample, and there's no reason to go any hotter. So you want to always make sure that you're choosing the appropriate temperature to completely digest your samples. So what's important as well is pressure. Understand that pressure is just a byproduct of temperature. So as we're digesting our samples, we're going to be generating pressure. So remember PV equals nRT from your early college, high school days. So wherever temperature goes, pressure is going to follow. And we want to make sure that we have full control over the entire digestion process and the temperature to ensure we have complete digestions that are done safely. Okay, so for those of you who have the SK15 with the thermocouple, so you would be using this in your reference vessel. This will be placed, of course, into your single reference vessel. So with the SK15, if you wanted to run a single vessel, you could do that with the thermocouple up to your rotor maximum. One thing you want to remember, though, is if you look at your application notes and in the manuals, you're going to want to set the power depending on how many segments you have. If you refer to the ETHOS UP user manual, it will tell you 1 to 3 segments and etc. So you're not going to always use full power if you only have a few segments. So the thermocouple is monitoring and controlling the temperature in that one vessel, and then it is using that temperature and that reaction to control the entire microwave. So it's very important that when you're running samples that you want to run similar type samples together. And it's always very important to understand that whatever sample you have in your reference, you must have exactly the same in the rest of the vessels. So if you have a half a gram with 10 mils of nitric acid of, let's say, soybeans, you need to have that exact same mass and acid chemistry in your reference as well as the rest of them. The reason for that is we need to make sure that since the composition of the samples is the same, we want them to all react the same. So you have to have the samples exactly the same in all positions. As a refresher, in case you don't remember, the minimum acid volume for the SK15 with your thermocouple is going to be 10 milliliters. And if you are using any of the quartz or the TFM inserts, we have the tri inserts as well as the individuals. That's going to be a minimum acid reagent volume of 5 milliliters. So next for the Maxi44, the Maxi44 is going to be utilizing a contactless IR sensor. However, this is from the right side of the cavity. So if you look over on the right side of your instrument, about where I'm pointing over here, to the right, you're going to see where the air is coming in that passes across the rotors to cool it. You're going to see 2 covers above and below, and in the middle, you're going to see where the contactless sensor is. So that is what's controlling the temperature of all of your segments during the digestion process. With the Maxi44, with this contactless sensor configuration, you're able to run 8 samples up to 44. So you want to make sure that you're running a minimum of 8 samples at a time. Minimum acid volume is going to be about 8 milliliters, so 8 milliliter minimum for the Maxi44, 10 milliliters for the SK15 with the thermocouple. And because it is a rotor-based system, you do want to make sure you run similar type samples together. And what the Maxi44 will be doing is with our temperature control, making sure we control off of the hottest vessel. Okay. So I also get this question a lot. How do I know if my digestion was successful? The real only way to know if your digestion was successful is by conducting an analysis via ICP OES or ICP MS. However, there are other qualitative things that you can use and indications to tell whether or not you have a successful digestion. Remember the goal of what we're trying to accomplish. What we want to do is we have our sample of interest. It can be many different things. We want to take that solid sample or the liquid, turn it into a fully dissolved liquid, which is what our system is doing, and get all of our elements of interest stable in solution. So that will typically result in a clear and colorless digestate after you dilute up to 50 milliliters, 100 milliliters, or your final volume. If your sample has high metal content, it is possible that it may be colored. So clear and colored. So example, you have a lot of iron, it might be a bit yellow. If you have different metals, they could be purples, reds, green, etc. So that's if you have high metals, say you're digesting metal alloys, that may happen. Also, another thing to consider is that if you're, say, working with plant material, much plant material is going to have silicates in it because that plant material, as it's growing and is absorbing nutrients from the soil, it also takes up silicates as well. So when you digest your samples and you're not using hydrofluoric acid or not interested in silicates, for example, in the cannabis industry or in the pharmanutrient industry, where we're not looking at silicon, you can simply let that settle out to the bottom. That is not a sign of an incomplete digestion. You're just leaving the silicates behind. Because then we can forego the use of hydrofluoric acid. And lastly, you want to make sure is that you're using the proper temperature to break down your sample. The more stable your sample is, the higher the temperature will be required, so the acids that you add to it can completely break it down. If we look at the slide on the right, on these two pictures, this is an example of what a clear digestion would look like. And then over here would be incomplete digestion. I'll go on the next slide, what can cause an incomplete digestion where you have material like this. So there's many things that can cause a digestion to be incomplete or not have the desired or the expected outcome. One typical issue could be you may be using a sample mass which is too high for the rotor that you're using. So if you have the Maxi 44 and you're working with a sample that may be an organic that's a bit more higher sample mass, you want to make sure that you're using the appropriate sample mass and acids for the rotor that you're using. If you have too high of a mass inside your rotor, what can happen is that depending on the sample type, it may generate more pressure than the system is set up for, can lead to excessive venting. With excessive venting, you have pressure loss, therefore you cannot reach the temperature that you need to in order to achieve a complete digestion. So you may need to adjust your sample mass a little bit. If you have a question about that, you can always ask us, reach in, we're happy to help. As I mentioned earlier, digestion temperature, the temperature at which you conduct your digestion is very important, and making sure you select the right temperature. So you may have to go a little bit hotter. Typically, what I would suggest is if you need to experiment with a higher temperature, go up by about 10 degrees Celsius. So let's say 190, 200, 210, etc. Up to the maximum at which you can use the rotor. You may also need to digest for a longer time period. Sometimes this may occur more often with inorganics if you're working with any types of ceramics. For organics, it's not really so much the case. And some of those signs of an incomplete digestion are going to be if your sample is yellow due to residual carbon content. That's what the yellow sample looked like earlier. It actually may look like you took a highlighter and let it soak in some water. It's going to be almost fluorescent. Residual carbon content can cause some issues on your ICP-MS, such as polyatomic interferences at the exact sample mass of some of your elements of interest, therefore leading to artificially high recoveries. You can also have cloudiness inside your sample, so if you digest it and when you dilute it up, if it's cloudy, that can be some undigested organic material. Or if you have some unexplained sediment, you don't know what it is. Typically, silicates can be different forms. It can be almost like a sand, like a clear sand, or it's a translucent type material that's floating. And it should settle to the bottom because it is more dense than water. And again, of course, questions here to help all the time, however we can. Next, another question that I get is, how do I clean my vessels? So that's really going to depend on what it is that you're doing as far as your detection limits and the types of digestions you're carrying out. But I tried to summarize this in more or less 3 different steps. So the first and the simplest cleaning method would be a simple rinse with deionized water. This may be sufficient if your analyte concentration is rather high, say in the % level, because if you rinse with DI water, you should be able to bring it down low enough. Now let's say you're going to lower levels, say in the ppb range, parts per billion. You may want to do a closed vessel acid reflux, which is essentially digesting blank acid within your vessels. What I would suggest you do is if whichever acid type you used for digestion, use that same acid. So if you used 4 mils of nitric and 1 mil of hydrochloric acid, I would clean with exactly those same acids, but without sampling them. You can either use the cleaning method that is stored here in the terminal by going to cleaning and selecting the cleaning method, or you can simply rerun the same microwave program that you used to digest your samples. Now, let's say you need to take cleaning one step further. There's typically two types of cleaning that work quite well. The first one is going to be something that's been more traditional. It's been around for labs for decades and decades, or heated acid soaks or acid baths. These are going to be, say, using 1-to-1 HCl or nitric acid to water, and these are going to be working at about 80 degrees Celsius, elevated temperatures. They do work well, but they do have some disadvantages, such as you have a large vat with acid. You'll have to dispose of that when you're done. You can only get down to certain levels because you'll eventually have an equilibrium of your metal contamination from what's on your sample to in your liquid. So therefore, you'll have to change baths if you need to get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. So it takes a lot of time, can take a day, overnight, hours and hours. The other technique that is highly effective for cleaning vessels, getting down to even the PBT range, is acid steam cleaning. The way acid steam cleaning works is we use a technique called subboiling distillation, where we are gently heating nitric acid below the boiling point, and then we generate ultra-pure acid vapors, which will clean our various components, our sample prep components. These are things such as not just our vessels and vials, but any sample introduction components for your ICP-MS. We do have an acid steam cleaning system here at Milestone called the Trace Clean. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this. We actually just did a webinar on this recently. So if you are interested in watching that, let us know and we'll be more than happy to send you that recording. We go over the various options and help you get a good understanding of vessel cleaning. We also do have a cleaning document which is available on Milestone Connect, which outlines the various methods for cleaning. So next, some people will ask about how do I save my runs. I have gotten this before. It's actually important. I like to talk about this proactively because by saving your runs, it actually is helpful if you need assistance from us. So before we get into that, let me show you what the terminal looks like. So here's my 660 terminal. I have my LAN connection. I have my 4 USB ports. So these USB ports can be used with either a USB stick on the top or on the bottom here. And this USB stick, you can only put in one USB at a time for saving. You also have video here. This is going to be for your Safe View camera in your ETHOS Up. And then this is where you would connect your device here. So this is where you would connect your system. Again, you can use this for a USB keyboard or mouse to connect to the 4 USB ports. And then the LAN is for connecting to the local area network. So when we save runs, how do we go ahead and do that? So of course, once you've completed your digestion, you would click on the pull-down menu and go to Save. Once you go to Save, you're going to get this down here. So what you see down here is going to be the location where you can save your files. You can either do on the USB or on the server. When you save your files, you're going to be generating 4 different files. The first one is going to be a DPR. A DPR is a file that's used for diagnostics. So this is going to be an archive file used for diagnostic use. This is very useful, say if you have an issue with your system and you need to send us the data, you can go ahead and do that. And then we can load it up on our system as if we did the digestions ourselves. Also, we have an XLS, which is going to be a spreadsheet. This will include any raw temperature data, so you're able to export and regraph any of your data if you want, say, in a spreadsheet or in a paper. We also have a bitmap of the run, so you can save this picture as a bitmap and also as a PDF of the report. So again, if you ever have any questions or any issues with your system and you want to reach out to us and ask us some questions, I would highly suggest for you to send us this data, especially the DPR is very useful, as well as the PDF. I can view that on my phone. Say if you send it to me and I'm not in the office, I can pull it up pretty quickly and get an idea of what's going on. So this is a feature that our ETHOS Up has. Many of you may or may not be familiar with this, but it is very useful, and I wanted to touch on it because we want you to be able to use your system as best as you can to its full ability. So you do have the ability to save any of the digestions that you do to a local area network. And by connecting to a LAN, not only does this allow you to remotely control your system, should it be allowed by your IT department, but you also have the ability to save your runs on the server. If you go into the settings, you would go into terminal and LAN. You can access this by logging in as administrator. A few points to understand about this. You want to make sure that DHCP is turned off because you want your IP address to stay the same all the time. You'll want to consult your IT department for any IP address settings. You don't want to choose your own because you don't want to clash with another computer on your network. So consult your IT department for the appropriate settings here. You'll want to enter in your username and password to the network. So that's going to be down here. And also the path for your server is going to be typically the IP address, not the server name. And then what you're going to do is create a folder called T660 on your server. And then your system will point directly to that. Okay, now we're going to get more into maintenance. So first, let's talk about the part of the system that typically requires the most maintenance are your rotors in your vessels. So first, I'll speak about the SK15. Things you want to do to make sure that you're in good working condition. First, let's look at the spring that we're looking at up top. So if you look at the picture, what I have here, we're actually going to look, and you want to see if there's any deformation or a color change or any cracks on the bottom or any parts of your spring. If there are, you want to replace that. Also, it's very important to make sure that you do not rinse these underwater, but simply use a damp paper towel to pat it off on both sides and to clean it. Also, another point that you want to make sure you do is the pressure screws, which are actually the screws in the top of the segments here. Every 6 months or so, 3 to 6 months, it's a good idea to spray these with a PTFE spray, such as the one that I have here. So with a PTFE spray like this, I would wear gloves, then I just give it basically one little spray, one spritz. I let it completely dry. Then what I'll do is I will screw this down into my segment and back out. An easy way to do that is simply take the end off of your SK segment, and then you can go like this. What that will do is it will disperse the PTFE particles that came from the spray to your to all of the threads in your screws. And the reason we want to do this is because we want to make sure that we are tightening down to the appropriate setting to which our torque wrench is set. So we are venting at 100 bar should we have to. In addition to the pressure screws, you also want to clean the bottom of your rotor. So your rotor body for your SK15. I'm not sure if you've seen it before, but we do have these little balls that are in here. These are kind of roller balls in here. And inside, you're going to see, you may see some dirt or debris. You can clean that out with, say, an air compressor, a little bit of alcohol on, say, a Q-tip or a cotton swab, such as these. And then once that's done, put a little bit of PTFE spray in here. Do that about every 3 months. Every 6 months or so. And lastly, what's inside, you've probably seen this over time. The bottom plate of your ETHOS may start to get a little dirty. So it may look a little bit like this, where you see some of these marks here, and you see some of them over here, right? So this can be cleaned very easily with some ethanol. Just on a paper towel, let it dry, and then you place this right back in. When you place it back in, just make sure that these holes correspond to where any of your temperature sensors are. Okay. And the last thing you want to check is on your vessels, which of course make the, which of course go through the most use. So you want to inspect these visually, make sure they don't have any thin spots. You want to make sure that, say you're looking at the top, it's not deformed, it's not white, you don't have a white ring around it. If you have any questions about that, you can simply ask us or send us pictures. But definitely check these. These can last with normal use typically around a year or so. So any deformation or cracking between these thin spots, you want to replace those. I do want to speak specifically to the reference vessel for the SK15 because that does require some additional care. So I'm sure you're familiar with the reference vessel, which has the ceramic thermal well around it. You want to visually inspect this and make sure it doesn't have any cracks. I actually chose one here. This is an older one. It's a bit hard to see on the camera, but this does have a crack right around here. So I would want to replace this, just this little piece. This actually comes out of the entire assembly. Also, not only do you want to inspect here, but you want to inspect on the bottom. The thermal well should be firm and rigid. If it moves at all, like this one is doing, that's because it's broken. We need to replace that. You also want to examine the screw, which is right here, before every run that you're doing, before you start for the day. You want to make sure that's completely tightened. Now, there's a special tool that came with your segment. It should look like this. It has two little metal pieces. So I'll put this into here, and then you just tighten this by hand. And then if it's completely tight, you'll be good to go. If you do need to replace this, you would simply loosen your screw. The screw comes out, and then you could pull out the thermal well and get a new one. This is outlined in the SK15 user manual as well. So for the Maxi 44, the maintenance is going to be much easier. Really, all you're doing is you're going to be doing the same lubrication to the bottom plate every 6 months or so. And if any of your TFM vessels or components are deformed or cracked, or have any white spots or any thin spots, you're going to want to replace these on your Maxi. So the maintenance is quite simple for that. And again, for the bottom plate, you would use ethanol and lubricate with a PTFE spray. So a common question that we get is removal of NOx from the vessels. So over time, your TFM components will accumulate NOx gas with use. So what happens is as your nitric acid is decomposing your matrix, typically organic matrices, you will generate NOx as a byproduct of that. So over time, this NOx gas may build up into your vessels. I do have a vessel nearby, which does actually need to be baked out. So it might look a little orange like this. This is a good indication that you have a lot of NOx which has been absorbed into your vessel. It typically should look something like I have on this one right here. This is really what it should look like. What you need to do is first we need to see if our components are absorbing microwaves. The reason that we need to remove the NOx from the vessels is because our vessels are supposed to be transparent to microwaves. Everything that's inside here other than your sample and your acids should be transparent to microwaves. So what we do is we do a microwave test. We make sure they're clean and dry so we don't have any sample or any residue. Then what we'll do is place them in the microwave oven, such as what you see here. Then you'll run the following microwave program. So you'll do 45 seconds at 450 or 45 seconds at 600, depending on how many vessels you're doing. This picture that you see here is for the Maxi 44, but for the SK15, what you would simply do is take your base plate and your vessels, place them on here, and then go around and do your microwave absorbance test. You will know if they passed or failed simply by touching them. So if they are warm or hot, they are absorbing microwaves because the NOx absorbs microwaves. Therefore, we need to bake them out in an electrical oven. We do this at 160 degrees Celsius overnight or a 6-hour minimum. What I've done for myself is I have an electrical oven that I use, and I set an a timer on it to turn off after a certain time period. Because we are evacuating NOx gas from our vessels, we do want to make sure that if we have the ability to vent or have some ventilation around the oven, we want to make sure we do that. So For those of you who have the Maxi 44, for the side IR sensor, there is a little bit of cleaning you want to do. It's very, very easy. You can clean it out here with some compressed air. Take one of these cotton swabs, put a little bit of ethanol on it, and just clean right over here, just like this. And then you can spray it out when you're done with, say, another canned air. That's all you really need to do, but you want to make sure that, let's say you were digesting some samples and had a lot of venting going on, just check and make sure the sensors are clean in case any residue built up on it. So we're getting towards the end of the presentation here, and I've talked about a lot of really good things, a lot of good information to help keep your system in peak working condition. So I do want to talk about Milestone Connect, which is a resource that we've built for our users. So Milestone Connect is a web-based platform that not only allows you to remotely control your system via a PC, tablet, or smartphone if your IT department allows for it, but also you have access to application notes and reports. We have scientific papers, all of the user manuals that have the information that I just gave you. We have video tutorials on working with our rotors, information on spare parts and consumables. So you would access this, you would go to milestoneconnect.com/N A. Your username is going to be your instrument serial number, and your password will be 12345 by default. You should have received a card like this from Milestone Connect. It has your username and your password. If you do not have this information and you're interested in accessing the resources of Milestone Connect, you can reach out to us at any time. If you have my email or my cell phone number, you can contact me. I'll also have that contact information at the end of the presentation. So when you go to log into Milestone Connect, it's going to look like this. You would click on ETHOS UP, type in your username and your password, and then you get access to application books. You can schedule service visits, application support. This is where you get all the videos, the manuals, and the quick start guide. So all available for you, and you can access. It's all simply web-based. So the last piece I want to talk about is our preventative maintenance. So this refers to the maintenance done by our service technicians of our milesCARE team. So this is something that's offered yearly. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, I do want to give you a little bit of an overview of what it does and the value that it adds to you and your lab. So preventative maintenance, what we're doing is our milesCARE technician will come in. They'll proactively replace any critical components or parts. If we have any service bulletins, anything we need to fix, we'll calibrate and test all sensors, whether it's the side IR for your Maxi 44 or for your thermocouple, which plugs into the side up here. We'll test all components and assemblies. What we're looking for is we're going to put the system through its paces a little bit, and we're looking for any weakened or stressed components, because as a preventative maintenance, the whole goal of this is to avoid any downtime that you may experience due to issues that have not been uncovered. So we try and look for some of those, make sure the hardware is working properly. We'll test for proper microwave output to make sure it's putting out the maximum it's supposed to the cavity. We'll also check all your consumables. So we'll look at your vessels, your vials. Let's say we come into your lab and we see an orange one like this. We may say, you need to bake that one out. This is how you do it. Or we may look at your consumables and say you have about probably 2 weeks left on that one before you have to replace it. So we'll give you guidance on the status of your different consumables and whether or not they need to be replaced right away, later, or they may just be in fine condition. And lastly, what we'll do is a safety check to make sure that there's no microwave leakage. So this is conducted yearly by our service team, and I will have Stacy DiGiovanni is our service coordinator. She's going to be the lady who's going to be responsible for setting you up with preventative maintenance contracts. So her contact information is going to be here. So that's all I have for today. I do have some questions that some of you did submit, so thank you for those. My email address is right down here at the bottom. So if you have any questions, anything that you may forget or you haven't, or you'd like to ask offline, you can simply email me here, and I'll be happy to help you with anything that you need. Also, I have the contact information, our email for our service manager and technical support director, Michael Randy. His email address is here, and Stacy is over here on the right. She is a lady who's going to be assisting with any of those service contracts. So with that, I'm going to switch over, and I'm going to look at my nephew for a minute. I'm going to see if you have any questions that you guys asked here. So let's see. So there was somebody here that said, I missed several slides taking care of a lab issue. No problem, I know what that's like. Yes, this is actually being recorded and we will send this to you. So for the lady recording of this afterwards, once it's all done. Let me see some questions that we have here. What is the most efficient way to clean the vessels to get rid of silver, tin, and gold background? That's a very good question. So typically what you want to do for vessel cleaning is you want to, if you digested, say with, I'm going to give an example. You digested a half a gram of sample with 5 mils of nitric acid and 1 mil of hydrochloric acid. 20-minute ramp to 210 with a 15-minute hole. Probably the most effective way of doing a vessel cleaning is by doing that same exact digestion without your acids. However, if you're trying to get rid of, say, silver, we might try with just nitric acid, a digestion in there. You can also go in and you can select the cleaning program that's in there as well. Let's see. I know we had somebody asking about digesting soils with petroleum contamination from metals. So it all depends on what your elements of interest are for that. So what to consider with soil and petroleum. So it depends on how much petroleum you have in there. We do need to be careful though, because petroleum products can be quite reactive. So if you're working with these types of samples, you may want to, let's say if you're with the Max D44 and you have some just petroleum residue, use a slightly lower mass for that. If you do have a specific question, I see the lady who asked that question, so I will get back to you on that. Actually, the same lady who asked about the recording, so you will get that, no problem. We're going to send that over to you. Any other questions? I don't see any in the chat right now, but okay, I think that's really it. So everybody, I thank you so much for your time today. If you do have any other questions that come up, again, we will send you this recording so you can keep this for your records and for future training of your different laboratory personnel. That's why we made this, to help educate you guys. So again, thank you all for your time. I'll give you back the rest of your day. And I will speak to everybody soon. And any questions, you know where to find us. I sure hope you do. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.